Our next section that we'll cover is Section 3, which is all about manifest destiny in the Mexican-American War. We're going to start with this concept of manifest destiny. So manifest destiny is basically the belief that it was our obvious fate to settle all the land from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. Okay? And our purpose was to spread our democracy. We had this view that our democracy was the greatest kind of government that you could have, and then we should spread it to all parts. We kind of started with the idea of manifest destiny during the War of 1812 when we really wanted to settle Canada and take Canada, and we thought that they would join the United States. Of course, that didn't happen, and now we turned our sights westward. Our growing population and the idea that there were growing economic opportunities, and there actually were economic opportunities in the West, kind of prompted this movement and made it quite popular. One of the key questions that would arise and that we'll deal with, especially in chapter 14, is slavery going to extend westward as well? If we're going to extend, what's going to happen with slavery? And that's an issue that we'll have to confront and deal with. One of the more famous quotes from a publisher named John O'Sullivan is our manifest destiny to overspread and to possess the whole continent which Providence, or God, has given us for the development of this great experiment of liberty. And what we're getting at, that quote right there, is you can see that it says right in there that this is God-given. So it's the idea that it was not only something we wanted to do, but something we were destined to do, and it was given to us by God, and it was our right to take this land and to make it ours and to spread our democracy and our liberty. So manifest destiny really took off with the election of 1844. We saw the Whig Henry Clay go up against the Democrat James K. Polk, and both of them ran on a campaign of expansion, but Polk was really adamant about it. It was one of his key goals. He said he was only going to be a one-term president, a four-year president, and during that time that he would add Texas, Oregon, and California. It was on his agenda, and he would find a way to do it. And part of the appeal of that was the appeal of balancing slave and free states with the addition of Oregon and Texas. So in 1844, Polk wins, and he takes this as a job given to him by the American people, that because he was elected, it was his job to fulfill the expansions that he promised. So he went about doing this in any way possible. In 1846, he took Oregon, didn't take it, but bought Oregon from the British. Actually, they split up the Oregon territory into half would go to the British and roughly half would go to the United States. And he annexed Texas. Texas wanted to join the United States. Now that he had Oregon to go along with Texas, a slave and free state, it wouldn't be as much of a problem. So he annexed Texas, and Texas would come into the Union as a slave state. This angered Mexico. Okay, remember they lost lost Texas during the Texas Revolution, but they thought that province had been stolen. And part of what we were adding as Texas was disputed territory that Mexico claimed that they still possessed. Talk a little bit about California under Mexico. Okay, when Mexico gained their independence, they eventually changed the way that land was utilized in California, and they ended up giving a lot more land to wealthy settlers that came to California, and they set up these large sprawling ranches with cattle, sheep, horses, and they hired these vaqueros or cowboys to manage these large herds of sheep and cattle. So that was primarily what their land was used for. These Californios, or they were native, most of them were once Spaniards. They were now part of the Mexican, under the realm of Mexico, but they referred to themselves as Californios. They felt very little connection to their faraway government in Mexico City. And eventually American settlers come to California. The Mexicans tried to keep them out as long as possible, but it was inevitable that they would move there. And these American settlers would eventually call for independence from Mexico, which would cause even more tensions between Mexico and the United States. Okay, this would eventually lead into the Mexican-American War, which we're going to discuss next. So what caused the Mexican-American War? There's obviously a variety of reasons, but one of the main ones was this idea of manifest destiny. Okay, the idea that James K. Polk brought to the presidency and used as his policy, and it was his goal to expand the United States, and he really succeeded in that. The big thing that brought about the war, like we said earlier, was the annexation of Texas, 1845, and just the main problem was that there was a disputed boundary. the United States claimed that Texas ended at the Rio Grande River, and Mexico claimed that the border was several hundred miles north of that. And there's a lot of disputed territory in western Texas as well. Okay, and then this event near the Rio Grande River in Palo Alto, Texas, where the U.S. Army provoked the Mexican Army into an attack that really actually led to the physical fighting in the Mexican-American War. Let's go back a little bit and talk about the events leading up to this. There was obviously tension between the United States and Mexico after the annexation of Texas. James K. Polk sent a diplomat to try to deal with that. Whether he expected this diplomat, John Slidell, to actually succeed is up for debate, but he did send him down to try to talk with Mexico to ease the relations between the two countries. He had three missions. First was to get recognition of the Rio Grande River as the border between Mexico and the United States. He was hoping that they would forgive, or offering to forgive $4.5 million of debt that Mexico owed to U.S. citizens in exchange for this. And he was hoping to discuss the purchase of the New Mexico Territory and the California Territory. That didn't happen. The negotiations between Mexico and the United States never took place. The Mexican government was angered and absolutely refused to talk with John Slidell. And that was seen definitely as a diplomatic slight by Mexico to the United States. It didn't play over well here in the United States. So many people in America saw that something was going to happen, saw that conflict was inevitable. Northerners were typically more anti-war. They thought that war would take away from improvements that could be used in the nation. Money that could be used for war could be used for help building their industry and help building their economy, and keeping American debt low. So they typically weren't fans of fighting the war. Northerners felt that it was a war of aggression, that Polk just wanted to take over big portions of Mexico, and of course he did. That was his campaign promise, and he wanted to go through with that. So many Americans weren't against an increase in taxes. They didn't like that idea, same as today. Typically higher taxes, especially for warfare, not exactly popular. Then John C. Calhoun thought that acquiring this territory would taint the United States. We'd be seen as imperialists, and imperialists typically aren't thought of in a positive light. Okay, we don't want to take land. If you fight a war, it's for a just reason of some sort, and just taking land because we wanted it wasn't a very just reason. So Polk needed to find a way to engineer the war so that it would gain public favor, both in the North and the South. And his plan is basically to get the Mexicans to attack us, and that's what he did. He sent General Zachary Taylor near the Rio Grande River, hoping that the Mexicans would attack us. This was the disputed territory. So to the Mexicans, an American army near the Rio Grande River was an invasion. So they went ahead and attacked. Okay. As soon as that attack happened, President Polk went to Congress to get approval to fight this war. This famous quote from James K. Polk when he was addressing Congress: "Mexico has passed the boundary of the United States, has invaded our territory, and shed American blood upon American soil. War exists by the act of Mexico herself." So right there, he's directly blaming Mexico, and he's directly stating that they attacked us and they shed American blood on American soil, and that war exists because of her acts, not ours. So we were seen as being the ones that were attacked. We were defending ourselves. They attacked us. We had no choice but to go to war, and that played over well enough with Congress and with the American people to justify going to war. If it had not played over as well, if people had seen what Polk was trying to do or understood what Polk was trying to do, he may not have won the favor, but he did, and we ended up going to war. Not everyone was sold on what Polk was trying to sell to the American people. Abraham Lincoln was one of the more famous Americans that was anti-war and against this war. He saw it as Polk misleading Congress and misleading the American people into starting a war for territory. He didn't view this war as being just. He didn't view it as a necessary war. He thought that it was going to lead to death on both sides, that was completely unjust and just for territorial gains. Henry David Thoreau, a famous writer and pacifist, didn't believe in paying for the war, didn't believe that he should pay taxes that would go towards the war effort, so he refused to pay taxes and was put in jail. And while I was there, he wrote a famous essay called Civil Disobedience, which was all about disobeying laws that you feel are unjust. So, looking at the two armies, we talked about this in class, the comparison. The Mexican army really just did not compare to the American army. Their officers did not receive the same type of training that we did. Their weapons, cannons, and technology were behind, and they were an army that was conscripted or forced to fight. Our officers received education at West Point. We had better cannons, rifles. We had the telegraph. We had just technology was vastly superior, and our army was typically more enthusiastic about the prospect of war and didn't mind that they were going to war. They saw it as an opportunity to, sorry about that. They saw it as an opportunity to um, prove their bravery, prove their courage, and to go on an adventure. Quite honestly, looking at the Mexican population and economy compared to the U.S. Population and economy, there's really no comparison. We had 10 million more people. Our economy was booming while theirs was struggling, and their industry lagged far behind ours. Sorry about that. The transitions there. So, like we said, deaths during the war. There's honestly many more deaths were caused by disease than there were by actual warfare. 7 out of 8 deaths were caused by disease. 12,500 soldiers died, but like we said, many of those from disease. Here's a map. Some of the more important battles, as you can see. U.S. victories, Mexican victories. There's many U.S. victories, including Winfield Scott, who won victories near the Rio Grande, then slowly worked his way to Mexico City, and eventually were able to take the capital, which would result in the end of the war. Sorry about the title up here, got cut off, but it says U.S. Army goes all the way to Mexico City. And yes, we do actually take our army all the way to Mexico City and capture the capital, which would lead to the end of the war. When it's all said and done, this was the territory that Mexico gave up. All of California, all of Nevada, all of Utah, and parts of Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. Vast, vast areas of land. Almost half of Mexico's total area would be given to the United States. Some years later, 1853, the United States wants to build a railroad line that would lead to the Gulf of California, and they end up just giving us the land rather than fighting for it. Again, they didn't want to get into another costly war, so they decided to give us the land at a cost of $10 million. Our last map here is all of our territorial gain through the process of manifest destiny, whether it be the Texas Territory, the Mexican Secession, the Oregon Territory, eventually the Gadsden Purchase. That would make up all the land that would create our 48 continental states, our 48 main states. Eventually, later, Alaska and Hawaii would obviously be added. But we had all the territory, most of the territory that would make up our country now. Through the process of manifest destiny, much of that territory obviously being gained because of James K. Polk and his expansionist policies. If you have any questions, make sure you post them to My Big Campus, and I will try to answer them over the weekend. Good luck with your studies for the test.